here because you've chosen to sort of invest in your future. You're interested in what's going to happen down the line, and you're interested in a university education, which is absolutely brilliant. A university education means that you never need to ask anyone if they want fries with that, ever again. You don't have to fold clothes that someone else has unfolded, and really you can have an interesting job. And ultimately, you can seek to change the world. And this is not a cliche, it's absolutely true. If you decide that you want to either build a company or go into research or work diligently in a sector, you can bring about changes that will impact on other people. You're more likely to do that if you've had the rigor of a university education than if you have not. So I really do hope that you go for a university education. I really do hope that you are sufficiently interested in STEM subjects, that you decide to go for STEM subjects. So university graduates earn between 20% and 50% more than non-graduates across their lifetime. So starting at a cool 20%. And by the time you get to about my age, the numbers have gone up substantially. But also STEM graduates, on the whole, also have a higher median wage. So there's really a lot to inspire you if you're looking to sort of change your own futures. So how many of you are considering coming to UCL? This isn't a trick question. It doesn't matter if you want to go to one of our neighbouring substandard universities. But how many of you are considering coming to UCL? A few of you. And some of you are considering going elsewhere. Well, that's absolutely fine, but the most important thing is that you do want a university education. So I'll tell you a little bit about the kind of work that I do. I started off doing a pharmacy degree, and by the time I got to the end of my pharmacy degree, I realised that I wanted to do something a little bit more than have a patient-facing role. So what pharmacy entails is, it is the distribution of medicines. Medicines can be very beneficial, but medicines are also very, very serious toxins. So you have to make sure that the supply is controlled by someone who knows about these medicines. So what pharmacists do is they control the supply of medicines. And they control the supply of medicines either by working with the regulator to decide which medicines are going to be approved for sale, or in a patient-facing role when it comes to dispensing medicines either in the hospital or in the community, on the high street. And pharmacists also are involved in medicines production. They're not the only ones involved in medicines production, but they also. But I decided that I didn't want to have a patient-facing role. I wanted to do research. And so what do? I'm a designer, so I design medicines. And I design medicines so that they have fewer side effects. That's what I do for a living. So about 20 years ago, I invented a material that is used in medicines that we're developing. And what this material does is that it makes very, very small particles. These particles are in the nanometer range. So they're about 100 times smaller than the width of your hair. Okay? So if you think about the width of your hair, you think about 100 times smaller, they're incredibly small. And what these particles do is that they allow you to shuttle the drug to different areas of the body. And if you can get the drug to the areas of the body where they need to work, then you can reduce the side effects. So we have one particular medicine that I'm particularly proud of. I wonder if any of you have heard about the fact that a lot of people die from taking painkillers that are opiates. Have you heard about that? Have you heard about what they call the opiate crisis? So there are more people dying in the US from taking opiates than there are from people dying from road traffic accidents. So there's a big surge in people taking opiates on prescription and then continuing to take them. So you know about Prince? Yeah? So Prince actually had a fentanyl overdose, and fentanyl is an opiate. So it's a big problem. So we're trying to develop painkillers that won't cause people to keep on taking them. And so we have one that we've invented. What we've done is that we've taken a molecule which is always secreted in the brain. So if you're walking out of here, you stub your toe, and stubbing your toe is actually quite painful. A lot of nerves will be activated. This compound will be released in your brain to take the edge off that first feeling of pain. but then it's quickly destroyed. So what we've done is we've wrapped this compound, this molecule, in our nanoparticles, and we deliver it to the brain through the nose. Because up at the top of your nose, you have a little window, a little hole, which allows drugs to get in. And so we've done that, and we've ended up with a molecule which, again, relieves the pain. We've tested it. We haven't gone to the clinic yet. That's the next stage. It relieves the pain, but what it doesn't do is cause the feeling of extreme well-being, something we call euphoria, which will mean that the medicine will be taken over and over again. So we feel that if this medicine then eventually makes it into the clinic, patients will have a way to relieve their pain very fast. It acts really quickly. Within a quarter of an hour, we already see pain relief in the preclinical space, in the animals. And what we feel is that if they take this, they won't want to take more and more, and so you're less likely to get this problem with abuse. One of the other things that happens when you take these opiates is that you have really bad constipation. So any of you that have had morphine or codeine will remember that this causes intense constipation. So with our molecule, because we make sure that it's limited to the brain, which controls the pain centers and the feeling of pain, so pain has an emotional as well as a physical dimension, then we make sure that it doesn't act along in the gut, and so you're less likely to have constipation. Another interesting feature of this medicine is that normally when people take these opiates, after a while they stop working, they develop tolerance to these medicines. And so one thing we've established is that with our medicine, because we're looking at a slightly different receptor, we don't have any tolerance. Now, if you have a very serious disease and you're taking these painkillers, the ones that are already on the market, and then you find that halfway through taking them, they no longer work. There's nothing else available for these patients. So then you have the agony of pain. And this agony of pain, of course, gives a very poor quality of life. And ultimately, you have a higher level of suicides with these types of patients who cannot get pain relief. So inventing a drug which will allow people to take this medicine and not develop tolerance will be quite a good thing. So these are the attributes of this molecule, and the reason why it works is that normally, if you took this molecule by mouth, you wouldn't be able to get it into the brain where it needs to work. It'll be destroyed in your stomach, it'll be destroyed in your gut, and it won't be absorbed into the blood. And if it's not absorbed into the blood, it won't be able to get to the brain. And even if it is absorbed into the blood, we also have a barrier between the blood and the brain. And this barrier is very difficult to cross. So we've circumvented this barrier by going through the nose with this molecule. And at the moment, as we speak, as Essie said, I do have a pharmaceutical company, and we are talking to people to try and license this medicine to them so that they will develop it in the clinic. So this is the kind of thing that I do. So we have a research group looking at how else we can use these tiny particles. So you could be in the position where you've invented something and you're trying to see if you can change people's lives. And you'll be more likely to be in that position if you choose to go to university, and if you choose a STEM subject, and of course, if you choose UCL. So you have to continue to plug UCL. Okay, so that's a little bit about my work, and I'll sort of tell you about my journey. So I was born in Hackney. Any of you from Hackney here? Oh, great. And then my family relocated to Nigeria. So talking about challenges, this was a very challenging time for me. So Nigeria had had a civil war, and the civil war had ended about 3 years before. Anyone know about the Nigerian Civil War at all? You heard about it? Oh, some of you have heard about it. So the older members of the audience have heard about it. Nigerian Civil War ended in 1970. So between 67 to 70, we had a civil war, and the place where I went to live was on the losing side of that civil war. And so because it was on the losing side, there was a lot of infrastructure damage, serious infrastructure damage. Bridges were damaged, roads were damaged, and the government was just trying to rebuild. But my father thought this was a great time to go to Nigeria, go figure. Anyway, we all traipsed off, and then I had to go to a secondary school. I was quite excited to be boarding in that secondary school until I discovered that there was no running water in this school. There was absolutely no electricity. And so that was a big change from living in Stoke Newington to going to live in this school, where going to the loo was an expedition into the sort of the bush, as it were, in order to sort of relieve yourself. So it was a very, very different life from the life I lived here. And what did I find most challenging? I wouldn't say that I found the lack of infrastructure most challenging. I found the fact that I was teased about my accent most challenging. If ever I started to speak in class, everybody would go, spruce, 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 spruce. And so this was really, really embarrassing for me. But eventually, I overcame that. And in the beginning, I didn't used to do well at all because I wasn't used to sort of studying by lamplight, and I'd sort of go to bed as soon as, you know, the lights went down at 7 p.m. And then I didn't do very well in my first set of exams. And then I realized that I really had to dig deep and start making friends. So I reconfigured my accent so it sounded more local. I started studying a lot. I made friends. And then eventually I did well in my exams and I went to university. So that was a serious challenge that I had to overcome. But there was more to come. And if that was a challenge, well, it was nothing like what was waiting for me in the future. So after I finished my degree, I did a pharmacy degree in Nigeria. And like I said, I thought I wanted to do something different, something slightly different from the patient-facing role. And I wanted to do a PhD. And it was very difficult to do a PhD then in Nigeria because, again, even though it was many years later, there was still, the scientific infrastructure wasn't there to really make important discoveries or to try and see whether you could push yourself. So, and this coincided with the fact that at the time I was married, I had 3 children, and then my marriage collapsed. So I came to the UK as a single parent to start a PhD. And when I first started the PhD and I went to see my supervisor, and I thought, I'm not going to tell him that I have 3 children because he'll never take me seriously. So I hid the fact that I was a mum of 3 children and got on with doing the PhD. And it was quite a hard life in the beginning. I lived in a bed and breakfast for the homeless. We had to share facilities with other families. So this was quite a challenging time. But eventually, one day I was sitting with my supervisor and we were talking about science, and I let slip that my daughter said, and he said, "Your daughter? You have a daughter?" And so the cat was out of the bag. And I said, "I don't not only have 1 daughter, I have 3. And he was stunned, absolutely stunned that I had hidden this from him. But you know what? The moment he knew that I was a single parent, he couldn't have helped me more. He was one of the most supportive persons in my career, totally supportive of me and the family and all the things I wanted to achieve. Really, really. So he was almost like a surrogate father to me at that time. So the truth of the matter is that if you talk to people about the challenges that you're going through, you'll find that most people will be really, really helpful. So I finished my PhD and then went up to Scotland to take up a lectureship, because I couldn't really get a lectureship in London, so I decided to move. But of course, then I decided to have a 4th child. Yes, I love having children, as you can see. So I'm a mother of 4 children and 2 grandchildren, I'm happy to say. And I'm enjoying the grandchildren a lot more than I enjoyed my children, I can tell you that. So anyway, I had my 4th child, and I had a grant. So in our work, what we have to do is that we have to apply for money. And when we apply for money, then we can fund our research. And if you don't get any money, you don't fund your research and your career dies. So you're constantly applying for money. It's like a treadmill. You never get off. So I was applying for some grants, and then I halfway through, I had to go on maternity leave. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll just finish writing this grant application. You know, when I've had the baby, it's going to be a breeze, you know, and the baby will be sleeping all the time. And yes, I'll be writing away, and it's going to be great. I'd forgotten what it was like, as you can imagine. So the grant application was due 2 weeks after I had given birth. And I thought, yes, it's going to be easy, because those first 2 weeks, they sleep 16 hours a day. But of course, they're awake in the crucial bits in the middle of the night. So this wasn't happening for me. My brain was a complete fog. I could barely make my way to the kitchen. I was bumping into walls, completely sleep deprived. So those of you that have never had children, yes, it is exactly as it's described. Sleep deprived, painful, breastfeeding every 2 hours. It wasn't working. And there was a deadline looming. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? Because this was a follow-on grant, so I had a high chance of getting it if I could just put the paperwork together. So I sat at the computer and fell asleep on the keyboard. So I realized that it was not going to happen. So what I did is I phoned up the program manager. That was the Wellcome Trust. And I said, well, I'm really sorry. I know the deadline is in 2 or 3 days, but I've just had a baby, and do you think you could give me more time? And he didn't even say anything. He just said, of course. How long do you need? I said, maybe 3 months, and then maybe then I would have got into a routine. He said, take 6. Take 6 months and then submit your application. Completely different from about 8 years before, where I hid my children. Now I was, of course, more empowered, and I confessed to my children. And the reaction was completely unexpected. And so I did take 6 months. I wrote the grant application, I got the money, and continued on my merry way. So it's very important when you go to university, it's not going to be particularly easy. It is a competitive environment. Most people come from being top of their class in secondary school to having to make their way up to their position in university, because everybody there is top of their class. So there will be challenges. But what you have to do is, if it looks like it's getting too much, simply ask for help. Simply ask for help, and you'll be surprised that most people will bend over backwards to help you. That's been my experience. I can't remember a time I've asked for help and the door's been shut in my face. Always, people have been very kind, because they see you're trying your best. And if people see you're trying your best, they want to help you. If they feel you're coasting, then they're not interested. But people want to invest in people that are working hard, simply so that they can take the credit later. No, that's not true. But people are motivated to help others. So I'm going to end on that note and say that I wish you all the very best. I can see lots of intelligent faces in the audience. It's really great. And when you're really successful, think about this motivational talk. Thank you.